Phonics.
Hi there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids and Raising Orchid Kids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And today I am very pleased that Kathy Hosty has joined me. Kathy, thank you.
You're welcome.
This took some doing.
I know.
Yes. And we are going to dive into reading, but first introduce yourself and tell the good people who you are and what you do.
Okay. I have a private practice called Metropolitan Speech Pathology Group that's been around since the last century. And we're Northwest Washington. We're basically a speech language, and as it turns out, literacy practice. Over time, I've become really interested in reading and written language. Mm-hmm. And it started out because I was treating a lot of preschool language kids at the time, mm-hmm. and got them really cooking, looking good, heading into kindergarten, pretty strong. And then I would get a call back in a year after kindergarten, actually, saying, my kid isn't reading, they're really struggling. And it was just happening too many times to kids with a preschool language history, and then they don't launch in reading necessarily. And so I got more and more interested in reading, and that's kind of my big interest of practice and has been for over 20 years. And man, the times have changed in reading over that span too. And I think it's an interesting thing to think about for a lot of people. Why is a speech pathologist interested in reading? You're supposed to be doing these other things.
Mostly spoken language.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Oral language, listening, mm-hmm. and talking. Mm-hmm. But as it turns out, reading is a language behavior. It is all language. Speech pathologists are actually ideal to be looking at reading and intervening with reading.
Yeah.
And that's really happening more and more in the last 5 or 10 years. Mm-hmm. Speech pathology has gotten very interested in reading and language.
Mm-hmm. And so we know in the literature that, yes, these things travel together because language things travel together. And so to the extent that reading is a language thing, yeah. it goes with. And so if you're watching this and you have, a preschooler, you should know but not worry that if your child is being treated for a speech or language issue, in other words, how they make their sounds or how they mm-hmm. think of what they want to say, that there's a chance that can continue through into literacy. Okay. And so, yeah, go ahead.
But not a panic situation. Okay.
This is not a panic situation. Exactly.
Correct. Expect. No.
That's right. Yeah. Good.
Correct.
So what happens is, and let's just take average kiddo who has not been in speech language pathology before, mm-hmm. in speech therapy before, goes to kindergarten and really is struggling to pick up what they are laying down in terms of reading fundamentals. What should we be doing? What should we be thinking if we see an older kindergartner who is not sort of seizing quickly what the instruction is?
Mm-hmm. You'd want to know why they aren't seizing it. Mm. And there are a few things. For some kids, it's what kind of instruction is going on.
Yeah.
And instruction can be a real issue. And there's more and more known about what kind of instruction is appropriate for all kids, not just dyslexic kids or kids with language-based learning disabilities. And it's the current terminology for it is structured literacy. And what I think is a very cool thing about it, structured literacy covers phonology, which is the sound system of a language. It covers morphology, which is the word structure of a language. It covers syntax, which is word order in a language, and in addition to orthography, and which is the print of a language. So people have come to really embrace the fact that reading is a language activity, and all of those areas should be addressed in teaching reading. So you'd want to be sure your kid is getting a really well language-based literacy instruction.
That's interesting. Okay, so the buzzword that most people will have heard is phonics.
Yes.
Or phonemic awareness, or phonetic something related to phonics. So which part of that, draw a picture for us, which part of that is most important? Where does it go? Like, where does it fit in structured literacy?
You need both of them. Reading this is also very valuable for a speech person. It comes from speech to print. Kids are already speaking. People say, oh, you have to learn all your sounds. No, you've got your sounds, and you've had your sounds probably since you were 1 or 2 years old. You've got the sounds. What you need to learn how to do is attach the sounds to the print of your language. So it goes from speech to print. To do that, you have to have good phonemic awareness skills. They have nothing to do with print. They're auditory skills. You have to be able to blend sounds together. When you have a word, you'd go like, at. It's the word cat, that's blending. You have to be able to segment words into their component sounds. So if I gave you a word and said, what are the sounds in pig? You'd have to be able to pick them off and say, p, I, g. And that's phonemic awareness, and move sounds around. So say pig, but instead of I, say ah, and then say pog. So those are the auditory skills that need to be cooking to access an alphabetic language. But then you get the phonics, which is the sound and symbol relationship. So you need to know the print that encodes the sounds. So a good program will be doing both of those things really heartily. So that's what needs to happen.
And it seems like, as you're talking, I'm like, there's so much, and there is so much. And most brains are wired to do this very, very easily and automatically. About 80% of brains, given this approach, will learn to read with absolutely no problem.
Yes, and some will even learn to read just on their own with no problem.
Right.
Yes.
So, and there's always this 20%.
Yes, the 20%. Yeah.
And so it's the 20% that obviously are most interesting to you and me, and it's the 20%, the parents of the 20%ers are watching this, right? By and large. And so of that segment, I don't know, you tell me, my opinion is like, it's like a half to 3/4 of them with this particular approach, with a really balanced, structured and phonetic
don't use
approach.
balance, because
no balanced literacy, no. It turns out balanced literacy is not, it's just not. So if you see that, it is code for, we don't think that phonemic awareness and phonetics and phonics is necessary, and that is not the truth.
That's it.
Okay, so there you go. But of that 20% that struggles, given the right approach, which what you're describing is, they will also learn to read.
Right.
Now, then you've got whatever of the original 100, like 5 to 10%,
right,
who really are going to struggle.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about them for a second.
Okay, so they really have different types of brain wiring.
My Alexa is talking to me. Alexa, stop.
Okay, Alexa.
Putting her off.
Yeah, they have different neurology, but it doesn't mean they're not going to learn to read. It means that it's going to take them a longer time at it, and they are really going to need good sound instruction, and probably a lot more of it than other kids. So that's what I think is important to know. If your child is struggling at the end of kindergarten, it's worth having a look at it and seeing why they aren't, because if you can give very simple, non-invasive tests for phonemic awareness and sound symbol recognition, that's going to give you a lot of information. That if the kiddo is having trouble like segmenting, blending, and moving phonemes, you're going to want to have somebody have a good look at that kid and start training up those skills.
Yep.
If somebody has really strong skills like that and just needs more practice, you might wait a little longer. But the thing is that that just speaks to me emotionally is, okay, if you're not reading in kindergarten and you head into first grade, but if you're not reading as well as your peers by the middle of first grade, that is just pure misery.
Yep.
That you just start feeling stupid really fast, and you really are not. You just need more and better instruction than you're getting.
Yeah.
That's why I really can't see waiting for things like that, because their early intervention has such positive outcome. And the self-esteem piece that rides with reading is huge.
Yeah, this is so interesting. I mean, you and I are very much aligned on this whole thing. When if I have a 15-month-old who's struggling to communicate, yes, let's put them in therapy. What's the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to learn to talk very quickly, And it is because that spiral of failure picks up speed very, very quickly, particularly at that age and stage of development where kiddos at 6, 7 in particular are looking around and they are classifying everything they see. And these are the smart kids, and these are the athletic kids, and these are the kids where I belong, and this is where I don't belong. And the last thing we want in an emerging student, right, which is like they're at the beginning of their school career, the last thing we want is for someone to think in first grade, I can't do that well.
I know. It's a heartbreak. And then without intervention, they fall further and further behind. And then they actually they can reach a point where the trajectory is just off. The cohort's going to be here, and they're just going to track under it.
Yep.
And then it mushrooms into, the old saying is, first to third grade, you're learning to read. People are actively trying to help you read. But then that sort of stops in third to fifth grade on. You're supposed to be reading to learn. So then if you aren't a decent decoder, you're not going to have the access to material that the other kids are having. And then you get a whole other cascade of problems.
And then you're going to hear things, parents, like reading is boring. I don't like to read. Reading is stupid. Reading is whatever bad thing that reading is. And really what it is a cover up for, I don't feel like I can do that very well, and so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. Then that leads down its own path, because the way you get better at it is, of course, by doing it. Yeah.
And so that's really where I do think like a speech pathologist who knows something, a speech therapist who knows something about reading instruction is really a phenomenal coach at that point, to a phenomenal leader to make it fun, make it accessible, break it down in the way it needs to be broken down, and know what the protocol is. There are lots, I'm kind of agnostic, but you tell me, there are many reading tutors out there and reading specialists out there. What's the state of like generally reading remediation?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's what goes on a lot with reading tutors are programs. There's the Orton Gillingham approach or method, or there are the Wilson programs, or there is a Linda Mubel program, and there are many programs, and somebody gets trained in a program, which is a cookbook of an approach, and that's what they deliver. and programs, I think they're dangerous because if you don't know what the thinking is behind it, you can't adapt it to an individual person. You might not even have they're not reading words, but you might not know why they're not reading words, because there are many different reasons and there are many different parts of reading. Like one might be okay, this might not be okay. And they're just doing a program.
More of a technician.
And even the International Dyslexia Association, up until the last 2 years, they were really behind Orton Gillingham programming and approaches. Now that language is leaving their website and they're talking about structured literacy. And they even came up with the term and the definition, and they're outlining all the components of language in order to teach reading and spelling.
Okay, so you mentioned, hang on, can we pause here for a second? The International Dyslexia Association has a very good website.
A great website for parents.
Yeah.
And for professionals as well.
Yeah.
Yes, like signs to look for things, what is good evaluation, what is good treatment, should you take a foreign language, how is your spelling, are you dysgraphic? I mean, just
perfect.
Really good site.
Good. And we will maybe link to that
that'd be great.
To the extent that there are show notes, we'll link to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So IDA has they've moved away from sort of programmatic language into a more language-based
reading approach. Yeah. And some of these programs are now also gearing themselves up, making accommodations to fit the definition for structured literacy.
Interesting.
So programs that didn't have much phonics are now putting in a phonics segment, or didn't have a phonemic awareness segment, we're now adding that.
So what's interesting about that to me, because I'm not a reading, I don't have a specialty in reading, I have a specialty in early childhood, is all of the things you mentioned are part of the core curriculum when you get a master's in speech language pathology, right? Morphology, which is how words are made, right? Exactly what you said. Grammar, syntax, the phonology of a language, like all of that it's baked in.
Yes. Yeah, it is, because it's a language behavior that comes from speech. Yeah.
There's one other thing I want to flag, which is not related directly to the Language Act of Learning, but there is something that sometimes happens with kids who are learning to read, which is they do not have convergence. And is that something that you have seen and know how to handle? Like, what's your experience with that?
My experience with that is that is generally not the problem in reading, because it is an auditory phenomena. It looks very visual, but the core deficit is a phonological deficit.
Okay.
So there will be a small number of people with maybe convergence things, but that is like a visual management deficit that is not causing the reading issue.
Okay.
Because reading is language-based and it's auditory.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Okay. Definitely also something to look at, but that's a super interesting, right? It's a
different thing. Yeah.
This is a conversation for another time, but it's so weird that we can look at, people don't think about this. You look at, I'm reading for something, here we go. You look at this shape and you assign not only meaning, but a sound to it. That is that's, how random is that?
Well, it sort of is random. That's why reading and written language are not natural skills like listening and talking. The reading and writing is bolted on to the listening talking system, brain system. Yeah, that's not normal at all. But our brain can do it.
Yeah.
Because we have the architecture for it. We can recognize faces and tiny little differences and changes. We can do that. You just have to train up on it. And then you can access that kind of code. And you can know that a T by itself can show a T. And if it's next to the H, it often will show a th or a th. And graphemes and phonemes, you can have one sound shown by 6, 7 different graphemes. Grapheme being either a letter or up to like 4 letters is one grapheme. Or you can have one grapheme, say the EA, that can show 3 different sounds. It can show the A in steak, the E in sweat, and the E in eat. So it needs to be organized for kids and kind of unfolded, but people can do it.
It's so interesting. Oh my
It's
God.
so interesting.
We could be here
So
all day. We're going to pause there.
Okay.
And we will come back another time and do more.
Okay.
Thank you. Kathy, this was fun. Thank you.
Really fun. Thanks, Gabrielle. Bye-bye.